I was reborn, and I returned to the exact day when Ansu's mother threw a bank card with 500,000 yuan straight at my face, and I still remember how in my previous life I had crushed that card under my foot and shouted that true love has no price, only to receive nothing but a cold, mocking smile at the corner of her lips and the disgusted look in Ansu's eyes, and for the sake of being worthy of her, I had gambled everything, pushing myself to the absolute limit throughout my entire university life just to earn scholarships. And after graduation, I entered her company, starting from the lowest and most humble position, working harder than anyone else. While others followed normal schedules, I worked day and night without rest, and when the An family company fell into crisis, it was me who, with relentless dedication and sharp business instincts, secured the key investment that pulled the company back from the brink of collapse, and I truly believed that I would become the pillar of the An family, that I could finally marry Ansu properly. But what awaited me instead was the complete collapse of my body, my irregular lifestyle, and extreme workload pushing my health into a critical red zone. And the last time I collapsed, the doctor told me I had terminal cancer and only a few days left to live, and it was at that exact moment that Ansu and Lee came to visit me. But there was no longer any compassion in her eyes, only relief, as if she had just cast off a heavy burden, while Lee didn't even try to hide his satisfaction as he wrapped his arm around her waist, looked down at me and said, "Chen-Yu, thank you for saving the company. It's very stable now. Xiaoshui and I are getting engaged next month." And she leaned into him and softly said, "Chen-Yu, don't resent me. My mother was right. We were never from the same world." And in that moment, I realized that my entire life, all my efforts had only been used as a tool in their love story, something to be discarded without mercy at the end. And in this life, I refused to remain a foolish slave to their love any longer. So I immediately took the bank card and smiled, saying, "All right, ma'am, I'll make sure to stay far away." And for the first time, Lin Fangying's expression changed, as if she had never expected this reaction from me despite all the scenarios she had prepared. And as I looked at the thin bank card in my hand, my eyes lit up because it wasn't just an ordinary card. It was my passport to a new life, the final nail sealing the coffin of my past, and afraid she might change her mind, I quickly snatched it from her fingers and added on my own. "Don't worry, not only will I stay away from Ansu, I'll also resign from the company and disappear from the city. I'll change all my contact information and make sure she can never find me again in her entire life. Is that enough?" And Lin Fangying stood there completely stunned, her mouth opening, but none of the words she had prepared could come out, as she looked at me like I was some kind of monster, and I understood why. Because just the day before, to please Ansu, I had pedaled for more than half an hour in heavy rain on a public bicycle just to buy her a famous cake she had casually mentioned, and when I arrived downstairs, I was drenched like a soaked rat, yet Ansu only leaned out of the car window to take the cake and looked at me with disdain as she said, "Chen-Yu, how can you be this pathetic?" While the man named Lie sat in the driver's seat with one hand on the wheel, smiling at me with satisfaction, his gaze filled with mockery and pity, as if I were nothing more than a dog desperately trying to win its master's favor. And in that moment, what overflowed inside me wasn't anger, but an endless sadness. And then I just smiled faintly, took out my wallet, and pulled out a photograph from inside. It was a picture of me and Ansu together, the most real thing I had ever had. And right there in front of Lin Fangying, without even the slightest hesitation, I tore the photo in half and threw it into the trash beside me. Then I took out everything in my wallet related to Ansu, from the cheap keychain she had given me to the very last thing that remained, and threw it all away. And look, to prove my sincerity, I don't need these things anymore, so you can rest assured now, I said. And the moment I walked out of the cafe, the very first thing I did was go straight to the bank, and when I saw the balance of 501,354 yuan on the ATM screen, I let out a long breath because those 1,354 yuan were everything I had painfully saved in my previous life, and it felt both ridiculous and tragic at the same time. Yet without hesitation, I withdrew 10,000 yuan in cash, stuffed it into my pocket, and went to the place I knew best, the base of the corporate group building. But I didn't go inside. I simply sat on a bench across from it and watched silently. Because in my previous life, I had treated that place like my battlefield, my refuge, where I had poured out my sweat and effort, spent countless days and nights, once filled with passion and enthusiasm, believing I had my future firmly in my hands. But now, looking back, I realized I had been nothing more than a replaceable part inside that building, a dedicated worker, an idiot who worked day and night for the benefit of others. And just then my phone vibrated. It was a message from Ansu on chat. "Chen-Yu, did my mother go to see you? Don't mind her, she's always like that. Wait for me, I'll come find you tonight, we need to talk seriously." And right after that, another message came. "I got bayos and fried snacks, your favorite, freshly made. I'll bring them to you tonight." And as I stared at those words on the screen, a deep sense of disgust rose inside me, because it was the same psychological game as always. Hurt me first and then soothe me, using cheap bits of tenderness to make me believe she cared, so I would willingly sell myself out and keep working for her. And in my previous life, she had completely controlled me. Just a little kindness from her was enough to leave me speechless with excitement, pushing me to work even harder just to prove that her choice hadn't been wrong. But now all I felt was nausea, so I opened her profile without hesitation and pressed the delete contact button. And after that, I stood up, walked into a nearby phone shop, changed my number, and then took a taxi back to my small rented room. A tiny place, but one I had always kept neat and tidy, yet on the walls there were still photos of me and Ansu, and on the shelf were books she had given me, and without a single emotion I began going through everything related to her one by one, stuffing it all into a large trash bag, tearing up the photos, burning the love letters, throwing away even the cheap gifts she had given me, and when I grabbed the last photo frame with her smiling face and tossed it into the bag, I felt my entire body lighten, as if I had finally let go of a burden I had carried for 10 long years. Then I opened my computer and wrote my resignation letter. No unnecessary words, just a few simple lines. Dear management, I, Chen Yu, voluntarily submit my resignation and request approval. Effective immediately with no need for salary settlement. Because I didn't need that money anymore, I just wanted to leave that place as soon as possible and cut all ties with those people once and for all. And after sending the resignation to the HR manager and my direct superiors, I closed the computer, picked up the suitcase I had prepared earlier with only a few changes of clothes and all my documents because everything else in that room was no longer needed. It might as well have been a simple funeral for the foolish life I had lived before, and with that I took my suitcase and left without looking back, leaving behind those petty memories. But as I walked down the stairs, I saw a familiar figure. It was Ansu, holding a bag of baos and fried snacks, standing nervously at the bottom of the stairs. And the moment she saw me coming down with my suitcase, she froze for a second before hurrying toward me and asking, "Chen Yu, where are you going?" Her tone carrying a hint of reproach, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look at her as I walked straight past. And when she reached out trying to grab me, I dodged, turned around, and looked at her directly. And it was the first time I had met her eyes since my rebirth, and she was still beautiful, just like always, with that flawless makeup. But now, behind that beautiful face, all I could see was selfishness, hypocrisy, and cruelty. And when she frowned and said, "What's wrong with you? I'm talking to you," her irritation started to show the moment I ignored her. Then she added with annoyance, "Is it because of what my mother did that you're angry? I already told you not to mind her. I'll talk to her again. But where are you going with that suitcase? Traveling? Are you moving out? Don't you think you're being childish?" And her tone was still filled with that same condescending superiority, as if all my emotions were supposed to revolve around her, as if she could never truly understand another person. So I looked at her and suddenly smiled before saying calmly, "Ansu, aren't you curious about what your mother told me?" And I pulled the bank card out of my pocket, waving it lightly in front of her eyes as I continued. "Your mother gave me 500,000 yuan to make me stay away from you." And her face changed instantly as she hurriedly tried to explain, "Chen Yu, don't take it seriously." But I cut her off mid-sentence and said, "I already took it seriously. I accepted the money and promised her I would disappear far away." And her face flushed red, half with anger and half with embarrassment, as if she had never expected me to reveal something like this so calmly, because in her mind, I should have been ashamed, humiliated, yet instead she looked at me with pain and asked, "How could you accept that money, Chen Yu? Are what we had only worth 500,000 yuan?" And I looked at her like I was watching the greatest performance in the world before replying, "Ansui, did we ever even have feelings between us? The feelings you're talking about are just you quietly enjoying my kindness, letting me work like a slave for your family's company while you turn around and laugh with another man in a luxury car. The feelings you speak of are saying you love me on one side while calculating how to inherit everything I built once I work myself to death." And although my voice was calm, every word felt like a cold blade stabbing straight into her heart as her face turned from red to pale white, trembling as she said, "Are you talking nonsense? I didn't." Yet the panic in her eyes betrayed her as she couldn't even look at me, and I let out a faint laugh before saying, "All right, you don't have to keep acting anymore. You know exactly what kind of person you are, and now I can see it clearly too. As for those 500,000 yuan, I don't think your mother was buying our feelings. She was just paying for the years I worked like a slave for your family. It's a bit little, but better than nothing after all. My life doesn't hold much value in your eyes." And after saying that, I didn't even bother looking at her bloodless face as I picked up my suitcase, turned around, and walked away. And when she shouted behind me, "Stop right there. Explain yourself clearly. You already know something, don't you?" I didn't turn back and simply said, "I know everything." Because I knew their plans, I knew the weak points of their company and its future. I knew exactly how they would fall from the very top and shatter into pieces, and I would be the one standing at the highest place, watching it all coldly from the outside. And without hesitation, I hailed a taxi and went straight to the airport, leaving behind the city I had lived in for so many years as it slowly disappeared behind me. Then I took out my new phone and booked a ticket to Seasonpana. Not for any particular reason, just because I wanted to go somewhere warm where I could finally relax completely. because from this day on I would live for myself. And as for Ansu and all her problems, they could rot in the past. And just then my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Chenyu, where exactly are you? Tell me clearly and then leave. Did you misunderstand something? Lee and I are just normal friends. And I looked at that message with a mocking smile on my lips, thinking to myself, normal friends who conspired together to use me. Normal friends who were waiting for me to die so they could take everything. And without hesitation, I blocked the number and turned off the phone. And outside the window, the dusk slowly descended, painting the sky in a deep reddish orange, marking the beginning of a brand new life. And when I arrived in Sisanpana, the air felt warm and humid, filled with the mixed scent of herbs and wet earth, and I found a small room in a hidden hostel among tropical trees to rest, where just opening the window revealed lush greenery. And on the very first day, I did absolutely nothing. I just slept. I slept from morning to night and then from night to the next morning, as if I was trying to make up for every lost dream from my previous life. And when I finally woke up, it felt like my entire body had come back to life. The exhaustion that had seeped deep into my bones completely gone without a trace. So I turned on my old phone that I had kept shut down for so long, and the moment it powered on, countless messages and missed calls flooded in like a tidal wave. Most of them from Ansu and her close friends. Chenyu, where are you? Call me right now. Hey Chen, are you even a man? If there's something, say it face to face. What's the point of disappearing like this? Chenyu, Xiaosu is about to go crazy with worry. Come back already. Stop acting like a child. And I read through each message one by one without showing any expression. And among them, there were also messages from the HR department. Chenyu, we received your resignation letter, but you still need to follow proper procedures. Leaving like this without notice counts as job abandonment. The company has the right to hold you responsible. Chenyu, Director An orders you to return immediately. There is an important project that requires your attention. Chenyu, if you do not show up, the company will process this as voluntary abandonment and it will affect your professional record. Threats followed by soft persuasion, the same old tricks, and I let out a cold laugh before deleting all of those messages. Then I took out a new SIM card and logged into a stock trading account that I hadn't used in a long time. And there was still some money left in it from the days I worked part-time during university. And as I stared at the computer screen, memories from my previous life flashed rapidly through my mind, because the greatest advantage of being reborn was information asymmetry. I clearly knew which stocks would skyrocket in the coming years and which industries would become trends, so I split the 500,000 yuan from the card into two parts, investing 200,000 without hesitation into a tech stock that no one knew about at the time, but that would multiply more than tenfold within half a year due to a technological breakthrough. And with the remaining 300,000, I converted it all into Bitcoin through various intermediary channels, and after finishing everything, I closed the computer and stretched comfortably, because from now on, all I had to do was quietly wait for those seeds to grow and bear fruit, and in the meantime, I would finally start enjoying a life I had never been able to experience before. So over the next month, I completely relaxed, traveling through the villages of Sisanpana, riding elephants, witnessing local rituals, drinking rice wine with the villagers, eating with my hands, visiting tropical botanical gardens filled with all kinds of strange and fascinating plants, admiring the craftsmanship of nature itself, and I even rented a motorcycle and wandered aimlessly through winding mountain roads, the wind whistling past my ears as it carried away all my worries and exhaustion. And I was no longer the Chenyu who was constantly burdened by plans and projects, nor the Chenyu who lowered himself endlessly just to please his girlfriend. I was simply myself, a free soul living for my own sake. And during that time, I occasionally turned on my old phone just to see how those people were reacting, and Ansui's messages gradually shifted from initial worry and anger to pleading and humiliation. Chenyu, I was wrong. Can you come back? Let's start over. Lee and I really have nothing between us, believe me. That day he was the one who insisted on taking me home. These days without you, I've realized I can't live without you. Come back soon. I miss you so much. And if this had happened in my previous life, just reading those words would have been enough to soften me completely. I would have rushed to buy the first plane ticket back, kneeling in front of her and begging for forgiveness. But now all I felt was how ridiculous it was, because what she missed wasn't me as a person, but the man who always obeyed her, who worked like a slave for her family and solved all her problems. Just a tool. I didn't reply to any of it. I simply watched her one-sided performance with quiet interest, and a month later I flew to Chengdu, where I completely turned into a man with nothing to do, spending my days eating hot pot and grilled skewers, tasting every dish that in my previous life I had only ever seen on food shows, wandering through every alley, strolling along Hinley Street, sitting in the tea houses of People's Park while sipping tea senkai, letting that slow rhythm of life, rich with the simple flavor of everyday existence, completely absorb me. And just like that, Another month passed until I finally received a call I had already been expecting. It was Sway, my only friend in the Ann group, a quiet and gentle technician who, in my previous life, had been the only one willing to talk to me when everyone else isolated me. And his voice came through hesitant as he said, "Brother Yu, where are you right now?" To which I casually replied, "Traveling? Is something wrong?" And after a brief pause, he asked, "Did you really leave the company?" And I answered simply, "Yes, I resigned." And there was silence on the other end before he lowered his voice and said, "Brother Yu, I think something is about to happen in the company." And I raised my eyebrows, pretending to be surprised as I asked, "What could happen? Isn't everything stable?" But he sighed heavily and said, "Don't even mention it. Ever since you left, the Jinsen project you were in charge of was handed over to lead by Director An." And his tone grew more heated as he continued, "That guy is useless. He just gives orders without understanding anything. He took the project plan you worked so hard to build and turned it into a complete mess. And he even said your plan was too conservative, that it needed an internet mindset. But the result was that the first phase demo failed completely. The partners are extremely dissatisfied, saying we lack professionalism and are even considering reviewing the cooperation. Now, the entire company is in chaos and Director Ann is so stressed he's getting mouth ulcers." And as I listened, I calmly lifted my teacup, gently blowing away the floating leaves while a faint smile formed at the corner of my lips. Because everything had unfolded exactly as I predicted. The Jinsen project was the core project of the Ann group for the coming years, the masterpiece I had built with all my dedication in my previous life, and only I truly understood its core technology and implementation plan, and before leaving I had intentionally left behind certain backdoors only I could decipher, along with several seemingly trivial points that were actually critical technical nodes, things that a mediocre man like Lee would never notice. And in his eagerness to claim credit and prove he was better than me, he was bound to make drastic changes and end up paying a heavy price. And Sway's voice suddenly turned urgent as he said, "Brother Yu, Ansu and the others are searching for you everywhere. Today she even came to the company to ask me if I knew where you were, Brother Yu. Shouldn't you come back and see what's going on?" And I let out a cold laugh before replying, "Go back for what? To clean up that useless man's mess?" But he hesitated and added, "But after all, the company is a place you were deeply connected to, and besides, Ansu still..." And I cut him off immediately saying, "Ansu and I are over, and whether the Ann family company lives or dies has nothing to do with me anymore." And he was stunned, asking, "Over? Since when?" And I answered calmly, "Since the day I left," before continuing, "So if they look for you again, just tell them you don't know anything and don't call me about this anymore." And with that I hung up, because although Sway was a good person, I didn't want to drag him into this matter. This revenge was mine alone. And as I leaned back in a bamboo chair gazing at the gray sky above me, my mood felt unbelievably light, because for Ansu and Lee, the second act of this farce was only just beginning. And in the days that followed, I completely disconnected from my past, traveling around Chengdu as the expanding landscapes broadened my perspective and gradually made me calmer. The resentment from my previous life, which once felt like a massive stone crushing my chest, slowly crumbling into dust and being carried away by the wind, because I was no longer living just for revenge. I was living to enjoy this new life that had cost me everything to obtain, and revenge had simply become something incidental, like a dessert that added a final, satisfying touch to this extraordinary journey. 2 months later, the 200,000 yuan I had invested in stocks had already multiplied fivefold and turned into 1 million. And without hesitation, I sold everything. Then, relying on my memories, I invested in another pharmaceutical stock that was about to explode. While the bitcoins I had bought earlier also began to rise steadily, everything unfolding exactly as I had planned, and for the first time, money was no longer something I lacked. But just when I thought the people and matters of the past were far behind me, an unexpected visitor shattered my peace. Because that day I was in a small town by Qinghai Lake looking for a Tibetan restaurant to eat, and I hadn't been seated for long when a figure, both familiar and strangely distant, appeared at the entrance. It was Ansue, but she looked much thinner and worn out. The flawless makeup she once had now gone, replaced by a face filled with exhaustion. And for a moment I wondered how she had found me. Though I quickly understood that with the resources of the An family, finding someone was only a matter of time, and maybe deep down, I myself wanted to see what state she was in now, and she had already spotted me, her eyes lighting up instantly as she rushed toward me and called out, "Chen Yu!" Her voice trembling as if she was about to cry. But I didn't stand up. I just watched her silently as she stopped in front of me, tears rolling down like broken pearls while she said, "I finally found you. Do you know how hard it's been to search for you?" And when she tried to grab my arm, I calmly avoided her, my coldness clearly unsettling her as she asked anxiously, "Chen Yu, what's wrong with you? Why are you ignoring me? Are you still angry at me?" Before quickly adding, "I was wrong, really. I was wrong. I shouldn't have gotten so close to Lee. I shouldn't have doubted you. Can you forgive me?" And as I looked at her tear-streaked face, there wasn't even the slightest ripple in my heart, so I said calmly, "Did you come to see me for something, Miss Anne?" And the way I addressed her made her freeze completely as she stared at me in disbelief and said, "Chen Yu, what did you just call me? I'm not Miss An, I'm Ansue, I'm your Xiaosu." But I simply replied indifferently, "Ansue, what can I help you with?" And my cold distance finally made her realize that I wasn't just angry, I had truly changed. Her crying gradually stopping as it was replaced by a deep panic while she said, "Chen Yu, something happened to the company. The Jinsen project failed. The partner wants to withdraw their investment and is demanding huge compensation for breach of contract." And I only let out a neutral sound as I picked up my chopsticks, grabbed a piece of meat, and chewed slowly before saying, "Good taste. Very tender." My reaction once again completely outside her expectations, because she thought I would be shocked, worried that I would treat the company's problems as my own like before and rush to fix everything, but I didn't. I remained calm as if I were listening to a story that had nothing to do with me, and finally she couldn't take it anymore as her voice rose. "Are you even listening to me? The company is about to collapse. Our family is going to be ruined." And I looked at her and replied, "So what? What does your company collapsing have to do with me?" And she stared at me in disbelief and said, "How can it have nothing to do with you? You're also part of the company. You built the Jinsen project. Only you can save it. Only you can save the company." And I calmly placed my chopsticks down, wiped my mouth with a napkin and said, "Ansu, did you forget something? First, I already resigned. Second, I am no longer an employee of the An Group, and your mother gave me 500,000 yuan to get lost. I'm just keeping my promise." And her face turned pale instantly, as if she had never expected me to say this so calmly, and she hurriedly tried to defend herself. "That was my mother, not me. I can return that money to you, double it, even 10 times more, as long as you come back and help the company." But I couldn't help laughing as I looked at her with pity and said, "Ansu, do you really think I still care about that money?" And then I added coldly, "Even now, you still don't understand. I didn't leave because of money. I left because I didn't want to keep being an idiot." And before she could respond, I cut her off again and said, "Do you know what's the most ridiculous thing about you right now? You've already reached your limit and came here to beg me, yet you still carry yourself like everything is rightfully yours. What makes you think I will definitely help you? Those laughable feelings between us or your pretty face?" And my words were like a blade driven straight into her heart. Perhaps no one had ever humiliated her like this before. After all, she had always been the princess everyone chased after, and now she stood there looking at me with trembling lips, unable to say a single word for a long time. And I thought she would be so ashamed that she would turn around and leave, but she didn't. Because under the crushing pressure of reality, the so-called pride she once held meant nothing. And after taking a deep breath, she stepped closer to me, bent slightly, and spoke in a tone I had never heard from her before. Almost submissive as she said, "Chen Yu, I'm begging you, as long as you help me, I'll do whatever you ask." Her voice trembling, her eyes filled with desperation and inner conflict, and I leaned back in my chair as a faint, enigmatic smile appeared at the corner of my lips, and I repeated slowly, "Anything?" And she froze, clearly understanding the implication as a flicker of shame and hesitation crossed her face, biting her lower lip before finally nodding, and I let out a satisfied smile because there was a time when even holding her hand made me cautious, afraid of offending her beauty, yet now she was the one willingly turning herself into something to bargain with. And I said coldly, "Just saying it isn't enough, shouldn't you show some sincerity first?" As I lifted a finger and lightly tapped my lips in a gesture filled with provocation and humiliation, and her face flushed red instantly as she stared at me in disbelief, perhaps never imagining that the same Chen Yu, who once obeyed her without question, who didn't even dare raise his voice, would now make such a shameless demand, and the diners around us began to notice the scene, casting curious glances that felt like needles piercing into her, while I kept my gaze fixed firmly on her trembling figure, knowing she was fighting a fierce battle inside. On one side, the survival of her family and the luxurious life she was used to, and on the other, the last shred of pride she still had. And I didn't rush her. I simply watched quietly until she finally seemed to make a decision, closing her eyes as she slowly leaned toward me, her lips cold and stiff, carrying the bitter taste of desperation. And I didn't respond or close my eyes. I just stared at her pale, humiliated face, watching her trembling lashes. And just as she was about to pull away, I suddenly reached out and grabbed the back of her neck, deepening the kiss as her entire body froze, trying to resist but unable to break free as I held her firmly, my movement rough and direct, devoid of any tenderness, driven only by the satisfaction of revenge. And after a long moment, I finally let her go, watching as she staggered back 2 steps before asking in a hoarse voice, "Is that enough?" And I calmly wiped my mouth with a napkin and replied, "I told you, if you're going to do it properly. Let's go to a hotel. I want to see how far your sincerity goes." And she seemed to lose all strength, barely able to stand as she looked at me like I was some kind of demon, and said, "Chenyu, do you really have to be like this?" But I just sneered and answered, "What, did you think this was some kind of market where you could bargain? Stop acting like a victim. You're the one begging me now. No, you don't even have the right to negotiate with me." And she closed her eyes and nodded. And I laughed softly, a smile without any warmth, before leading her out of the restaurant as the strong wind outside fluttered the edges of her clothes while she followed behind me silently like a lifeless puppet. And instead of taking her to some luxurious 5-star hotel, I chose the most rundown and cheapest hostel in the town. The room small with only the most basic furniture, and the moment she stepped inside, she frowned, unable to hide the disdain on her face as she asked, "Here? Really?" And I sat down on a chair that looked like it might break at any moment, crossing my legs calmly as I said, "The great Miss Anne is used to presidential suites. This kind of place doesn't suit you, right? But let me tell you, this is the maximum I'm willing to spend on you. Because in my eyes, you're only worth this much." And once again, my words pierced straight into her heart like a blade. She walked silently to the window, turning her back to me as she stared at the desolate view outside, standing there motionless like a statue. And I didn't pay her any more attention as I took out my phone and began managing my stocks. Because just as I had predicted, the pharmaceutical stock had released extremely positive news in the past few days. Its price hitting the upper limit several days in a row, and my capital of 1 million had already turned into 3 million. And as I watched the numbers dancing across the screen, a deep sense of satisfaction filled me. A kind of pleasure that felt even greater than taking revenge on Ansue. And I don't know how much time passed before the sky gradually darkened, the room still without lights, making everything feel dim and heavy, while Ansu remained by the window, unmoving. And when I finally called her name, her body trembled slightly before she slowly turned and walked toward me. And in the faint light, I couldn't clearly see her expression, only those empty, lifeless eyes. And she stopped right in front of me as I stood up and step by step forced her backward until her back hit the cold wall. Then I lifted her chin with my hand, forcing her to look at me as I said calmly, "Look at me, Ansue. Do you know something? Countless times I imagined this day I longed to possess you, to make you cry and beg me for forgiveness, but now looking at your face, all I feel is emptiness." And with that, I let go of her and stepped back, creating distance between us, leaving her staring at me in shock, unable to understand. And I took out my wallet, pulled out all the cash I had, just a few thousand, and then I threw each bill at her face one by one as I said coldly, "Take this money and get out. Didn't you want my help? Did you really think that by sacrificing yourself I would go back to working like an idiot for your family? You overestimate yourself and underestimate me far too much. I called you here today not because I actually wanted to do anything to you, but because I wanted you to understand just how miserable and ridiculous that so-called sacrifice you think is so valuable looks from my perspective." And on her face I saw shock, then humiliation, and finally complete collapse as she fell to the ground, covering her face with both hands while letting out a broken, desperate cry. But I only looked at her coldly without a trace of sympathy, because everything happening to her now was the result of her own choices. And without another word, I turned around, opened the door, and walked straight out without looking back. And as I reached the entrance of the hostel, I heard her desperate scream behind me, "Chenyu, why are you treating me like this? Why?" And I stopped for a moment without turning around and answered calmly, "The path you chose was yours. Never regret it." And after saying that, I walked forward with steady steps, disappearing into the darkness of the night as her cries echoed behind me before slowly fading away into silence.